We are starting our 6th week of lockdown lessons. 6 weeks. Oh, it's getting long now, isn't it? As you should guess, this separation is not great for me at all. I'm missing you a lot. Remember that you can contact me through any of the pre-arranged online platforms. You can also find all the video lessons on my YouTube channel, Mrs. M Teaches English. This week we return to our study of the Scottish play, starting with Act 4, Scene 1. You will need your textbook, your notebook, and you should be watching the play on digital theatre. I did put a notice on Edmodo informing you of this brilliant production of Macbeth, which is being screened in full on YouTube for a short period of time. It's a fantastic production. I encourage you to watch this one before it's taken down from YouTube. The link has been posted on Edmodo. Today we're going to recap Act 3 and then study Act 4, Scene 1. You will remember that the key events in Act 3 were the murder of Banquo and his appearance as a ghost in the banquet scene. The whole of Act 3 focuses on the nefarious deeds of Macbeth. In Scene 1, he arranges for the murders of Banquo and his son Fleance. In Scene 2, we watch an important conversation between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. It is interesting to note how the balance of power shifts in this relationship. In Scene 3, we have the tragic death of Banquo, but with Fleance's escape, we realize that the witch's prophecies can still come true. In Scene 4, we have the important banquet scene with the appearance of Banquo's ghost. Macbeth's reaction to this apparition is met with horror by his guests. It's clear that Scotland is aware that Macbeth's ascension to the throne is the result of some skullduggery. Scene 5 is often left out of the play. It depicts Hecate, the queen of the witches, or the goddess of witchcraft, showing her authority over the weird sisters. It does appear that their power is limited. In Scene 6, we see a response to Macbeth's rule. Malcolm, the rightful heir, is in England to raise an army to defeat Macbeth. Obviously, the English audience watching the play in London during Shakespeare's time would have loved the idea of an English army marching to Scotland to save the day. Do not forget that we are heading to the writing of a literary essay on these themes in the play. Let's move on to Act 4. In the opening scene, Macbeth makes a return visit to the witches. Please turn to page 106 in your textbook. The act opens with the witches around a cauldron, chanting spells and making potions. These cartoons show a fun update on the ingredients. Hecate makes a reappearance, seemingly giving her approval to the weird sisters and the spells they have been conjuring. Macbeth demands answers from the witches. He appears brave, resolute, not at all scared of the black magic used by the weird sisters. It is clear he wishes to see into the future and seeks reassurance that he is securely positioned on the Scottish throne. The witches respond with 3 prophecies, which appear from the cauldron as apparitions. Firstly, that Macbeth should beware Macduff. Secondly, that none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. And thirdly, that no harm will come to Macbeth until great Birnam Wood marches to Dunsinane. Macbeth is, of course, delighted. Surely his position is secure. Macbeth pushes the witches for more assurances. He wants to be told unambiguously that his position as king is not under threat. Reluctantly, the witches conjure one more apparition. A row of 8 crowned kings march across the stage. The last king holds a mirror to reflect a line of unending kings. And bringing up the rear is Banquo's ghost. Naturally, Macbeth is distressed by this apparition. The witches refuse to answer any more questions and vanish. At this point, Lennox enters and tells Macbeth that Macduff has defected and fled to England. Macbeth, in an aside, makes the decision that he will punish Macduff by attacking his castle at Fife and killing his family and all his servants. The scene ends on this chilling note. Macbeth should be feeling pretty secure now, right? He couldn't be more wrong. In the next slide, you will listen to British teacher Mark Birch analyze the scene for you. You should take notes and annotate your own copy of the text. Pause the video in order to do this effectively.
Hi, this is Mark Birch, and this is a quick revision of Macbeth Act 4, Scene 1. The horror of the witches is immediately reasserted through the use of choral chants, the trochaic tetrameter, rhyming couplets, the prophetic fallacy of thunder, and a sense of communion with animals as their familiars, just as they were presented in Act 1, Scene 1. What differentiates this from Act 1, Scene 1 is the additional horror that's represented through the creation of the spell and the cauldron's contents that's used to inform it. First of all, we have this toad that's been sweating poison for 31 days. Then the nature of the horror is increased by the second witch introducing a variety of different body parts from initially animals. So we move from a snake to a newt to a frog to a bat to a dog, a lizard, etc. Not just the toad of the first witch. The discomfort of the audience is increased still further by the third witch's cauldron ingredients, as she takes us from supernatural creatures into human body parts, culminating in the highly disturbing extended description of a finger of a baby strangled by a prostitute in a ditch in which the baby was born. One of the things that's worth noting here is that the baby would be damned as a result of not being baptised, as would the Jew, the Turk and the Tartar that are referred to in the preceding lines. So the connection between the witches and the damned is made more evident. The brew is almost concluded by the choral chant of double, double, toil and trouble, something that's very well known to us as students of Shakespeare. But one of the things that people often overlook is the fact that it's a spell designed to double the amount of suffering in the world, double, toil and trouble. The use of the internal rhyme, double and trouble, could also complement the sense of excess being sought by the witches, as well as the actual lexical repetition of the word double. Everything contributes to this sense of excess, of going over the top. And what's over the top here is the trouble, the turmoil, the horror in the world that the witches are creating. Hecate then interrupts the proceedings to really compliment the witches, but I'm not going to go into that too much because we've covered that really in Act 3, Scene 5. The audience should be shocked by the second witch's next comment, because she says, "By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes." And Shakespeare's been at pains for the first part of this scene to establish the witches as the ultimate embodiment of evil. We've witnessed the horror of their spell creations, and yet here they're anticipating something wicked coming towards them, illustrating the extent of Macbeth's evil, given that they refer to Macbeth as such. He's dehumanized as well as something, not a person, not Macbeth, just something wicked this way comes. The recklessness of Macbeth is evident in his treatment of the witches. He's completely offensive towards them, you secret black and midnight hags, and commands them to answer him, whatever the consequences, showing his self-interest. He commands them to answer him no matter what the consequences, even if it means that the winds destroy the churches, that the waves swallow up the land, if the crops are destroyed, castles topple, etc., etc., till destruction sicken. He's quite prepared for the earth to be destroyed as long as he gets the answer that he wants. The masters that are referred to by the witches are the evil spirits that control them. These subsequently take the form of the apparitions that follow. But one of the interesting things here is Macbeth's language use. He says, "Call them, let me see them." And the brevity of those clauses, the use of imperative verbs, remind us that the last time we saw Macbeth was in Act 3, Scene 4, where he said, will to hand which must be acted ere they may be scanned. In other words, I'm going to do things straight away. There's no sense of procrastination here. None of the Macbeth that we saw early on in the play. This is someone who acts impulsively, and there is no guiding conscience or guiding restriction in terms of their rationality. He just does what he wants to do. The first apparition states, "Beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife." And it's interesting that this is a possible symbol of Macbeth himself, given that it's embodied as an armoured head. Macbeth dons his armour in order to face Macduff, and Macduff cuts off his head. The second apparition that essentially states "none of woman born shall harm Macbeth" could represent Macduff, who was, as we find out later, from his mother's womb untimely ripped. It's interesting in terms of the witches potentially foreshadowing the play's conclusion by stating that the second is more potent than the first. Remember, the first we've suggested symbolises Macbeth, and if this one's symbolising Macduff, then Macduff is more powerful than Macbeth. Macbeth's initial response to this echoes his earlier claim that if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. In other words, well, there's no need to do anything because fate has lent its hand. However, almost immediately he rejects this, asserting that he will make doubly sure by killing Macduff. Once again, this is an example of Macbeth being steeped in blood. He's willing to do anything, even if he's convinced himself that there's no need. And he believes that killing Macduff will allow him to return to a state where he can sleep, free from doubts and fears, sleep in spite of thunder. Thunder here metaphorically representing the kind of turmoil of his brain, and we've already established that Macbeth has trouble sleeping because of the profound guilt that he experiences. And the final apparition, a child crowned with a tree in his hand, could represent the young Malcolm, with that tree symbolising the carrying of the trees from Burnham Wood to Dunsinane. What we see here in all of these apparitions and their effects is the supernatural manipulating Macbeth, promoting an unthinking character who believes himself to be invulnerable. So, for example, the third apparition states, "Be lion-mettled, proud, and take no care who chafes, who frets, or where conspirers are. Macbeth shall never vanquished be." And this then promotes this idea of Macbeth being able to do whatever he wishes to do with impunity, therefore fulfilling the kind of desires of the supernatural. We get a sense of how empowered Macbeth now feels by the fact that he threatens the witches if they don't reveal the situation with Banquo. And so the illusion appears of 8 kings, the last with a glass in his hand, with the ghost of Banquo following them. Now that glass could have been used as a dramatic device to show that the line of Banquo stretches on infinitely. It's also interesting to consider whether it could have been used originally to reflect the image of James I in those first performances of Macbeth, representing the way that Holinshed claimed that James believed himself to be a descendant of Banquo. This is perhaps reinforced by the references within this part of the text to the twofold bulls and treble sceptres. Both of these are symbols of kingship, but very specific symbols of kingship, given that the two coronations of James I could be represented by the twofold bulls, and the titles that James held of King of England, Scotland and France could be represented by the treble sceptres. So you get a sense that this is again perhaps flattering James I, because we see the line of Banquo extending down to him and then on to the crack of doom as if it's an infinite line. And finally, the number 8 is probably significant as well, because the 8 kings could represent the 8 Stuart kings of Scotland. It's ironic that it's Lennox who's clearly the lord who's accompanied Macbeth to this meeting with the witches, that irony being evident to the audience given the way in which Shakespeare's juxtaposed the scene in which Lennox criticises Macbeth with this scene in which he's the sole companion of Macbeth. Thereby, Shakespeare reveals that Macbeth has no one who he can truly rely on. Upon their departure, Macbeth curses the witches and states, "And damned all those that trust them." This is deeply ironic because Macbeth's damning himself given his belief in the witches. We've already seen in this scene Macbeth rejecting procrastination, but here the parallelism conveys that strong link between emotion and action. The parallelism's evident in firstlings of my heart, firstlings of my hand. That firstlings really just implying the first thing that comes to his heart, and that heart, that seat of emotion, is going to immediately manifest itself in his hand in action. Having listened to the witches, the need to simply act is even stronger. As soon as he feels he wishes to do something, he's going to do it. And that determination is evident in the list of those that he will now kill, which immediately follows this. He's going to demonstrate no compassion. Because Macduff's a threat, he's going to kill his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. The aside concludes with a rhyming couplet: "No boasting like a fool, this deed I'll do before this purpose cool," reinforcing the kind of finality of this. This is absolute determination. He is no longer going to procrastinate. And those words, that image, purpose cool, echoes Act 1, Scene 7, words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. And Act 3, Scene 4 as well must be acted ere they may be scanned. But particularly this imagery of cold and hot, he's now going to act in heat, in passion, without allowing rationality to cool his purpose. Okay, ta.
Now answer these 5 questions in your notebook. Skip 2 lines between each answer so that you can add information when we mark your answers in the next lesson. Pause the video here so that you can write down these 5 questions. As usual, I am ending the information about a scene with some key quotes. You should have a list of quotes that you are memorizing in order to embed them in your literary essays. We're done with Act 4, Scene 1. I'll see you all in the next lesson when we start with Act 4, Scene 2.